You're listening to the Nature Talks podcast, a podcast about education and connecting learners of all ages with the outdoors and nature. My name is Kevin O'Shea and I'm your host. I'm an early years educator with a passion for connecting kids and adults with the outdoors. I'm a passionate naturalist who spends as much time as I can exploring nature, learning about plants, birds, and bugs, and then sharing my amazing experiences with others. In each episode of the Nature Talks podcast, we'll have conversations with people making education connections with students and nature. More than any other time in history, we need to be sparking a passion for conservation and sustainability with the young and old alike. And in this podcast, we'll talk to educators, students, scientists, and citizens making a difference in the world today. Sit back and get ready to learn something new and exciting about nature education. Well, hey there, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Nature Talks podcast, the podcast that's all about environmental education. My name's Kevin O'Shea, and I'm a Canadian early years educator who is currently based in Shenzhen, China. I've spent the past 20 years moving around and teaching in Asia and doing what I can to help spread the word about environmental education and connecting children with outdoors and nature. Now, in our last episode, we had the honor of chatting with Liz Ford at the International School of Phnom Penh. In this episode, another fantastic conversation with a very inspiring educator. I get to sit down and talk with Aleksa Moss, who is the head of early years at Utaloy International School in Guangzhou, China. And she's got a fantastic story to share with you about her journey in education, her journey into being a champion of sustainability, wildlife protection, gardening, you name it. We really get to geek out here and talk about a lot of very interesting different topics. And let me tell you, Aleksa really knows her stuff. She really knows what she's talking about. And I had a really great conversation. And you're going to get to enjoy that right now. Welcome back to another episode of the Nature Talks podcast. And this episode, I'm very happy to be chatting with Aleksa Moss, who is another fellow China educator, China-based educator. And thank you for coming on the Nature Talks podcast.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here. It's a topic near and dear to my heart.
Awesome. Yeah, and absolutely. That's, as you know, mine as well, hence the podcast. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you are, and a little bit about your current context, position in education?
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan in the United States, but I've lived the expat life pretty much from university onwards, where I went to Toronto for school for my undergrad and then have bounced around Asia for the most part. My first teaching experience with my own solo classroom was at a charter school in Detroit, and it just happened to be a kindergarten class in an old science lab. So that sort of was the spark of connecting beyond just a typical homeroom classroom to that transdisciplinary or like, what can I do with these random materials of educational approach. And then my trajectory kind of took me through Macau and Indonesia and Sumatra, and then up to Shanghai. And now I've kind of taken a different step with my professional life, and I'm the head of early years at Utaloy in Guangzhou. So it's a little bit more of an administrative role. And I'm part of that, impetus into leadership, because I think as early years educators, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, for the general context is that we're loath to give up the classroom. It's often that early years educators would make amazing administrators, but they tend to stay in the classroom. But I wanted to be able to have a little bit more voice in terms of bigger decision making. And that sort of wraps around to this podcast and this topic, because the decision making about what we can do in our classrooms in terms of bringing life and sustainability into the classrooms is something that we can make changes as individual teachers about. But then as leaders, we need that leader to say yes to us when we have the crazy idea of putting bees on campus or having animals in the classroom. or starting like a little farming co-op in the back garden. Like you need somebody to say yes to that. And I wanted to be that person.
Yeah, that's something that I think came up in my last episode where I was talking with Liz down at the International School of Phnom Penh. And it's a conversation that's come up over coffee, over drinks with educators I've had over the years, is that if you're as a teacher and you have the passion for sustainability, you have a passion for teaching biodiversity or creating projects, if admin don't buy in, then you're stuck. And I've been in that situation. I've been in contexts before where admin didn't see things the way I did. And it was like banging my head against the wall when you realize that I can really only do something for my classroom. And the 25 little people in my room are going to have an amazing year, but you want more than those 25 little people. You want everyone. And fast forward to moving on to other schools, when you work at a school where admin share the same values and see the importance of sustainability and all those things, it's fantastic because, you say, I want to do this. And they're like, okay. Well, let's plan it out then, and then it's just like, wow. Yeah. So that's fantastic. And I totally understand, you wanting to make that move upwards into administration, because like you said, you have more of the ability to support those who have those great ideas. So what is your background? Now you say you mentioned that, your first school was a charter school in Detroit. You had that science lab happen in there, but I'm curious about your background when it comes to things like sustainable living, gardening. What got you interested in this?
Yeah, so I jokingly tell people that my parents are neo-hippies. They're too young to actually be hippies, but we grew up with this idea of a DIY, get your hands in the dirt and like do something or take action. It was a normal part of our upbringing where we were doing service projects on the weekends for our community. My parents were super active in our community group when I was a child in Detroit. And they've been involved in projects like community gardens for as long as I can remember. And when I was teaching in Detroit at that charter school, my mom just happened they already had their community garden on their block. They have like a collaborative gardening space on their block in the suburbs. But she was also volunteering at a larger community garden right in the heart of Detroit. So she was sort of in my neighborhood in terms of close to my school. So she came in and volunteered with my kindergartners a couple of times to put some plants and edibles in, like specifically looking at those easy to harvest vegetables that have high yield rewards for students, where if you plant a radish, you can actually have a hope of eating a radish within an academic year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Versus the permaculture idea that is a different part of that. Mm-hmm. And then, we're from a similar area in terms of Canada, the US, the same geographic region. And it's fairly common to have a cottage or, go camping on the weekends, that sort of thing. It's a normal pastime. And much to our chagrin, instead of buying a cottage, my parents bought a farm. So their like weekend retreat as they're nearing their retirement age is a hobby farm. And I say hobby farm, but it's like serious hard work. They have bees and they have poultry, and then they have like a lens on two different things. They've got their normal, like what you would consider your big kitchen garden. Yeah. They also have a garden that's all natural dye plants, like for fiber art.
Oh, wow.
And then an eye towards permaculture, which is the thing that kind of gets me really excited. Of if you plant a food forest or a permaculture area, that is a benefit beyond your lifespan, where a garden you're going in and having to do every year, like there's effort that has to go in. Yeah. Whereas if you plant those hazelnut shrubs or you put in the berry patches and those sort of things, that's just the magic that comes back every year. So that's a bit of that background of growing up with my hands in the dirt, even though realistically, I don't have a super green thumb. I just know what I can do and I stick to what I'm good at in terms of which plants I can keep alive.
Well, I mean, it's interestingly enough, the whole concepts of permaculture and of food forests is something I'm just starting to get interested in and learning more about and researching more about, obviously because of where I am, the geographics where the place I live at the moment. That's not something, but kind of more thinking more long term. And to be honest, the whole idea of farming is something that's really appealed to me. But I'm not going to fool myself here. It's going to be the goal is to, in the future, live in a place where I could have that small hobby farm. And it would probably not involve animals, to be honest. It would probably be mostly just that kind of the agricultural aspect of it, the horticulture, the plants and things.
But bees count as animals.
Well, yes. Well, no, they are. Actually, to be honest, in places like North America and even where anyone is taking care of, especially European honeybees, they are considered livestock animals, because a lot of beekeepers do use them specifically as pollinators. Of course, there are places in the U.S. and Canada where they move their colonies around, and then there's a lot of issues with regards to that, but that's for another podcast. So I'm curious, what are some of, I know we've gone back and forth on Twitter, and you've talked about, you've mentioned some different projects that you've taken on, even before your current school, like when you were in Shanghai and different places. Could you tell us a little bit about some of past projects you've worked on that were really interesting and kind of fun?
Yeah. So, the sort of big picture that I want to communicate here is that a single teacher can do some really cool stuff, right? Especially if you've got that admin that says yes to you. So back when I was in Sumatra, I was at a really small school, and the culture there was such that everything was historically had been imported from the United States, both people, students, and materials. Okay. And we had been putting in new classrooms. There's sort of like pod buildings in the jungle. Okay. And one of the things that I kept looking around and thinking, like, why are we putting these giant plastic play structures that have been imported from the United States at exorbitant cost into this beautiful jungle? So one of the projects that I was able to do there is put in sort of a play yard area for the early years children that borrowed from nature. So for a climbing structure, we put in felled tree logs into sort of a radiating spider type shape. So there's balance, gross motor, climbing, just from natural reclaimed wood that had come down on campus. Nice. We had a local artisan put together rattan pieces for hanging swings and seating areas and little like cave-like shelters that allowed the students to have imaginary play and dramatic play, like, playing house, playing kitchen and those sort of things. And just leveraging what we already had instead of like that idea of sustainability. There's so many points to it. The amount of fossil fuel, energy, and time that it takes to import something around the world when you're at an international school, the materials that it's made out of, and this is getting better. We see more eco-friendly things in educational, like corporate product type things. But, 8 years ago, that was still an issue of like giant hunks of plastic. Right. Yeah. And then look around you and read the room. What's your environment? Like, how can you bring the nature and the beauty that you already have into the school setting in a very literal way? Like, this is our play yard, right? Yeah. So that was sort of my first really where I felt huge success of like, I made lasting impact on not just my class, right? Yeah. And then in Shanghai, I was lucky enough to have an administrator who also loved animals and was willing to say yes to me, to my crazy ideas. So what I think it's more than an expat issue, but one of the expat issues that really gets under my skin is the impermanence of pet culture, where a lot of times families will come overseas and adopt a pet without necessarily doing the research or looking into what happens when your contract is over and you're leaving that country. And I find this affects small animals the most. You know, cats and dogs, there are routines and regulations, and
you can take them with you.
Exactly. They'll help you get them out, right?
Yeah.
But when you're looking at bunnies and guinea pigs and turtles and fish and hermit crabs and all of those gateway pets that families will often adopt when their children are excited about having a pet when they're small. A lot of times then there's this desperate call on our chat groups saying like, I've got a guinea pig or I've got a rabbit and we're leaving in 6 months and I don't know what to do, right? Yeah. So my classroom ended up being a mini zoo of...
Oh my gosh, I had this conversation. I had a conversation like this at breakfast this morning with my family about me and fish in my classroom and how I used to have so many fish and animals because other teachers wouldn't care. And I'm the one who like, I can't allow that poor little goldfish to die. Come to Mr. O'Shea's room.
Well, and you hit on a really important point there. Having classroom pets is extremely hard work. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of thinking and planning of like what happens during break or
lockdown.
Yes. During lockdown, my home became more of a zoo than it already is. But the value that I see in the children being able to experience those things and the personal, like heartfelt benefit of these are still creatures and they had a loving home and, you know, you don't want them to lose that. And I knew I had faith in myself in providing a loving home for them in my classroom. So we had Shimmer the guinea pig, who lived a good long life. For a classroom guinea pig, she stayed in Shanghai when we moved down to Guangzhou with another fellow animal lover teacher. We had hermit crabs of varying sizes, degrees, colors over the years. Our parent association was awesome, and we put in a request to get a really big tank in the hallway. So that is where we had water snails, all different sorts of fish, bottom feeders, regular kind of, and feeder fish, because we had 2 fairly sizable red-eared slider turtles who, you know, in the pet markets here in China, often you'll find like a coin-sized turtles in big bins, and you sort of pick your little coin-sized turtle and have it in a little bowl on your desk for a while. But newsflash, those turtles get bigger and they live a long time. So
yes, they do.
What started out as like a toonie-sized turtle, 2 turtles were, I don't know, a good probably 7-8 inches in diameter by the time I left Shanghai, and there's, as far as I know, they're still going strong in that hallway tank. You know, we had to put systems in place to maintain that stuff. Like,
well, you know, it's interesting. I'm thinking like that's an issue, not just here, but in so many other places with those. And I love the term gateway pets. You know, for example, in like Japan, where I've spent a lot of my adult life, most of my professional career, a huge issue with red-eared sliders. I mean, those are an invasive species. Those are indigenous to the southern United States. There were popular pets in Japan, and the same thing happened. Oh, that's kind of big. I don't want this. We release it into a pond, and suddenly they're out competing all the local species. And I can remember at one point in Kobe, Japan, where I lived, at the local aquarium, they had a program where if you could capture red-eared sliders and bring them into the aquarium, if you captured a certain number, you would get like a free season's pass.
Well, that's one way to get those invasive species, right? Hopefully they had a really lovely habitat for them.
I'm sure I'm hoping they weren't doing anything negative, but it's also true. Like, I mean, what you're saying with those, I love the idea of pets, of classroom pets, but you said, there is a lot of responsibility And especially for those little ones, like I'm a piggy lover. I've got piggies, so I have one piggy now, sadly. But even like when one of our guinea pigs passed away recently, my kids are like, can we get another one? Let's get another one. And we're like, you know what? No, because we're probably not going to be in China that much longer into the future. And I don't want to get another one and get really attached to it, knowing that we're going to be leaving in a few years. And, it's just like, we'll get another one when we're committed more to stay somewhere longer.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. And you do have to think about those lifespans, like my personal pets. So I have, my school menagerie in Shanghai, which some of those animals are not long living animals, and some of them are. You have to put those systems into place. I have 3 cats in my life who are all rescues from 2 different countries. And we did a lot. My husband and I were really active in catch and release spay and neuter in Shanghai in our neighborhoods, and sort of the neighborhood watch of making sure that the strays in Shanghai were sort of cared for, and keeping an eye on health and that sort of thing. Okay. Because depending on your climate, right, like in Shanghai, it doesn't actually, there's no proper freeze in terms of winter. So when you think about up north, or like where I'm from in Michigan, a lot of the stray population, cats, dogs, and otherwise, is there's a natural attrition in terms of weather. Yeah. And then in like where we live Shenzhen, down here in southern China, or in Shanghai, basically anything between Shanghai and Hong Kong, the animals are facing predators, but they're not facing nature in the same way as cold winters. So then those populations boom. So that's one of those things where you have to think about, doing good for your community, of course. And then when you take on the personal responsibility of pets, making sure that you're thinking through that timeline. Like, we're expats, we're used to moving quite frequently. We've been in China for a while now, so it hasn't been a big issue. But when our girls get older, we're going to have to consider, are we willing to fly them around the world, or are we going to need to stay put for the end of their lifespan, that sort of thing, right? So that those trajectory thoughts, that when you're at the pet market and you're so in love with a tiny little poofy bunny, that you really need to think about, even like, especially if your administrator is one that is saying yes to classroom pets, right?
Yeah. What's your plan? And it's interesting because I've got a friend who is a teacher in Canada, and she's a teacher in the province of Quebec. And she said that, at least in her district or her school board, there's like a 0 class pet policy. Like, they're not allowed to have anything. And she laments that.
One, right, with health and safety, where everybody poops, as we all know, as educators. And that cleanliness level and that systemic guarantee of health and safety, like, I have to think about that now, right? In my role as an administrator, it does get harder to say yes to certain things when a kid could be handling pees and poops of an animal, or turtles get a notorious bad rap for salmonella, but there's accuracy to that too.
Well, I mean, it's like around here in Shenzhen, we've got those giant African land snails that are everywhere, invasive, and those have some of them can have a bacteria that can cause like encephalitis or something like that. I was reading a story recently. I was doing some research into them. I try to educate the kids at my campus, at least with those giant African snails. I taught them the difference between native tree snails and those ones. Like, we don't touch those. And I'd read an article about some public schools here in Shenzhen that had some kind of science project where the teachers had the kids going up and collecting them. And then a whole bunch of kids got hospitalized because they had, moved that bacteria from those snails into their own mouths and noses and got really sick. And I realized I've going down a YouTube rabbit hole one night that there are people who keep those as pets. But
and they can like chew through concrete. Those
and they're everywhere here, and it's interesting, and it's interesting to bring it back to that the thing you mentioned about the project that you and your husband were involved with taking care of those stray cats, or making sure that they were cared for as best as possible. that is a huge issue here. I mean, there's stray cats everywhere. And my kindergarten class last year had, unfortunately, a reality nature lesson, something I really had to unpack, where we have an area called the Secret Garden where I spread bird seed every day. And we've got amazing bird populations and the kids learn all about birds. And one day we were in there, and to the horror of my students, there was a scream. And as I turned around, there was a stray cat had leapt out of a bush and was tearing apart a spotted dove right in front of my whole class. And they just stood there like, ah! And the bird, there's like a wing went that way. And I'm just like, ah! And I got my TA. Well, I got my TA to take the kids away, and I chased the cat away and picked up the remains of the bird and removed it. And then afterwards, I brought the kids back to the classroom. I'm like, all right, how am I going to unpack this? And I did, in a way that was appropriate, but it was like, I can't just leave this.
Well, that's, you're probably the hero of the cat population for laying down bird seed in a dedicated, it's like the new restaurant for this tree.
Well, and that's it. That's what sometimes when I've come in the morning into school, I see all the little doves around, and they're not the brightest birds by any means, because they're completely oblivious to the fact that there's like I've seen like cats like hunched down ready to leap, and I'm like, hey, I'll throw a pine cone at the cat, like, get out of here.
I have full confidence in my Lily that she can take down a bird. She was an adult feral when we adopted her.
Oh, wow.
And I've seen feathers in her mouth. Not obviously, we live in a high rise, so my access to nature is kind of limited to my view at the moment.
Yeah.
But we've pushed our world out a little bit. So we have a really nice balcony space, and we were able to put in this like safety wiring that's fairly common around China, but I haven't seen it elsewhere. So the cats can safely go outside.
Okay, yeah.
Onto the patio, and we have sliders that we can just leave cracked open for them. And I've sort of turned it into a little jungle oasis for them. Mars, our eldest cat, is from Sumatra. So she's our jungle baby. She loves nothing better than laying in plants in the sun. So, we do a lot of cat grass and catnip for them. And, things that we've verified are safe to be edibles for them are down low. And then I have my salad garden that I have going. We'll see how successful it is this year. Last year, moderate success. This year, it seems to be going much better. It's been a bit more temperate so far.
Yeah, it has been.
But it's that, how can you bring life into your life, right?
Yeah.
Because for me personally, there's nothing worse than coming home to like a sterile environment with no plants or animals. Like I don't know that I could tolerate that. I don't know if I could have survived lockdown without plants and animals.
Yeah. No, I'm the same. No, absolutely. Like, for anyone who follows my Twitter, there's always things growing. Someone recently said to me, when is growing season for you? When does growing season start? I'm like, it never ends. Like, it's just constantly. And if I'm not growing it, if it's too cold to grow outside, I'm growing it all inside. I constantly have tomatoes growing, which, by the way, teachers out there, tomatoes take a really long time to grow. So if that's something you want to do for a project with your students, like, we can have tomatoes and make pizza. You're talking months and months and months. But those other things, like you mentioned, radishes and things.
Right. If you're lucky like we are in terms of our climate, you can almost turn that into a permaculture situation where like you could have a big pot of kale or greens going year round here.
Yes,
so that's those sort of low hanging fruit, literally, that what could you actually harvest, right?
Yeah.
So I planted 6 different lettuce greens about 2 weeks ago.
Okay. And
hazard a guess that in about 2 weeks I could do microgreens now if I wanted to snip them, but I'll be able to eat a salad in about 2 weeks, I think, out of my pot, which in terms of sustainability are actually just upcycled water jugs that I've made cute little knit hammocks for to hang them along my patio balcony. Because one of those things that you might think about in terms of, okay, well, I want to try all this stuff and plant all these seeds. And I like to eat avocado, and I've sprouted my avocado seed with my students, and now I want to plant it. but it can get kind of expensive if you're trying to be beautiful about it in a consumer way, in terms of buying pots and things like that. But you can still do like boho chic with upcycled stuff.
Oh, so, yeah, absolutely.
You know, we can't drink tap water here. So we have large jugs of water, but then we always have those couple of emergency medium-sized jugs for when we forget to call the water delivery service in a timely manner. As I think expats in countries like ours all are resonating with.
Yep.
So then those medium-sized jugs are the ones that get turned into plant the avocado seed. I have 3 lychee saplings going. They're about 8 inches tall now. And that was from last lychee season. We got lychees from a local area in Zhengchen, and then I just sprouted a couple of the seeds, and they're such cool little trees with these delicate leaves.
Nice. So I've got some tangerines. I've got some tangerine seedlings going at the moment, and avocado. But that upcycling is so key. And that's like, for example, in my classroom, everything I use, we plant all the time in my classroom, and it's all upcycled stuff. It's all yogurt containers. My kids eat yogurt in the morning. I wash them out, save them up, bring them to school. And I've got so many. I was like distributing them to other classes and getting other teachers, oh, you need 30, here 30, here you go. And then we just use them again and again, because eventually those seedlings need to be moved on to bigger pots or bigger things. So then I just dump that out, clean them out, and save them. And I've got these little potting plants or little pots for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of my big successes last growing season sort of was potatoes. So again, like I think resonates with many people, when you buy vegetables, sometimes you have those aspirational vegetables that sprout before you eat them. And I just planted a couple of those potatoes that had sprouted eyes just to see what would happen. And in a clear water jug that I just cut the tap off with an X-Acto, and you could see the entire root system. And then potatoes get quite tall and have really beautiful white flowers. And I ended up with a dinner's worth of basically new potatoes out of that one water jug of planting one sprouted potato.
Wonderful.
So those little bits and pieces that perhaps aren't counting as farming, but are those experiments into, like urban homesteading.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, this is what I'm all about. You're preaching to the choir here. I love this. And the potatoes are something. I've got these great things I'm using recently. I've dipped my toes into the world of grow bags, which are made from recycled PET bottles. And they're really fantastic because when you plant in them, they air prune. So you don't get all the root bunching kind of thing. And what I've noticed is when I've grown tomatoes in traditional plastic pots versus those, the ones in the plastic pots grow very tall and they're thin and spindly. The ones in the grow bags are much more full and are producing a lot more tomatoes.
Like bushier.
They're much bushier. They're not as tall. They're much bushier, more full. My 3 tomato varietals that are currently in the works are 3 different types of cherry tomatoes: black cherry tomatoes, canary yellow ones, and then a traditional red. Oh, wow. Let's see how they go. Cool. Well, I'm finally having success with my tomatoes after years of trying here. So I finally figured out what to do. So I'm curious, as my internet is starting to maybe not be as stable as it once was in this interview. I'm hearing some issues. I'm curious, what are some future projects you've got planned for your school? Just for yourself, if you could let us know as we kind of wrap things up due to my internet.
Long-term wise, in terms of our program, one of the things that we started out last year and it's sort of becoming a norm in our culture is every time there's, as we use materials at school, there's natural attrition. You lose things get broken, whatever. And as things that we currently have deteriorate, we're replacing them with natural materials, recycled loose parts for math manipulatives, this sort of thing, so that everything's has that eye on teaching and learning, but there's that lens of sustainability in terms of, we want to see more natural materials. We want to see more wood and that sensory input that kids get from real things, from real materials versus like plastic things. And a note on this for all of you teachers out there, and parents, anybody, is that things like zero waste and sustainability and going green, it doesn't have to be like throw everything I have away now and replace it with sustainable materials. It's every time you buy something new, think about the sustainability factor or the green factor. Every time something breaks, replace it with something that has a longer lifespan, is made of natural materials, is post-consumer recycled, that sort of thing. So that's the big ethos that we're putting into play now in our program, especially in the outdoor areas, where moving away from those big plastic toys into bamboo and mud kitchens and things like that. So that's the thing at school. At home, salad garden is the big one for me right now. I, wander out, and then let's all just send good vibes to my dragon fruit plant, because it's going like crazy. I've had 3 blossoms, but I have yet to have fruit. So I'm hoping this is going to be the summer that we have fruit, because the blossom takes something like 25 to 30 days to actually bloom, and it's night blooming. So then you have to night pollinate it. And then from pollination to fruit is another 50 days. And I have yet to have the beginning of a fruit make it. Twice it was typhoons that just took it out. The winds were just too high and they broke off. And once it was my helper. So that idea of like, let's have a fruit this year.
Yeah, that was a battle I had I had that battle with watermelons last year. They would take off and they were lovely. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there they are. They're growing. And they get about fist size. And then the birds would get to them. And then I realized I've got to use nets. So I'm trying. I've got a seedling growing right now. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, so if people want to get in contact with you or find you on teacher social media, that kind of place, where can people find you?
Twitter is the place that I'm most active educationally. And then if anybody reaches out and actually wants like more of a conversation, I'm happy for you to share my email. We can do that on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, cool. So Twitter's probably the best way, folks. And for those out there, I think, people joke about Twitter sometimes, like Insta's the place to be or this or that. But, to be honest, if you're an educator, Twitter is the place to be. That's what I found. It's definitely so many great resources out there and people to learn from. Well, Aleksa, thank you so much for coming on the Nature Talks podcast and sharing all of the awesome you've done and are doing. Thank you. It does feel good to there's that horrible phrase now that everybody says of like humble bragging, but it's not this. That's not even what this is. It's just look around your world and make it be the world you want to live in. Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. Have a plant in your office. Have a pet at your house. Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I'm a big bug nerd. I'm an entomology nerd. That's my kind of one of my passions. And I mean, I had the wonderful opportunity to do a TEDx talk about how bugs are the gateway, the gateway creature to get a lot of kids hooked on nature. And how I use bugs and birds and things like that. And I'm talking about it, and I'm not going around saying, look at me, everybody, look what I can do or what I know. I'm just trying to get more people interested in it, and I want more people to do it. Yeah. And then hopefully there's going to be kids that I don't get to teach in other places that are going to get hooked on it too. And then, we build a nature army. Exactly. One teacher can impact how many hundreds of kids over their career. And if that one teacher has a team that gels with them and loves that vibe, then it spreads little by little, right? We can spread the joy of Well, that's why I hate that phrase when people say one person can't make a difference, or one person can. Yes, one person can absolutely make a difference. It might not be winning the Nobel Prize, but you definitely can make an impact day to day.
I think we're both inquiry educators. We're both PYP educators. And I think there's that thing that we see. I see it in students, especially around exhibition time, our upper primary students, where they think action has to be like taking all the plastic out of the ocean immediately, and that's wonderful. Yes, absolutely. Let that be the fire that gets lit in them. Mm-hmm. But we can't expect like immediate global or large reaching change. It's look local, look around your house. Can you go plastic free in one room? Look around your classroom. Can you bring in some life somehow, or the inquiry about life, and those little bits, they do spread and they do spread out.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I hope that things go well in your neck of the woods with regards to restrictions and whatnot. We're having some kind of, because of COVID, things are getting we've been online, I guess. I hope you guys can remain in person. Fingers crossed for you. Fingers crossed. We're walking the tightrope, the COVID tightrope as it is this time around. So absolutely. Okay. Right. Well, again, thank you. Well, I really want to thank Aleksa for taking the time to stop by the Nature Talks podcast. Very inspiring conversation, very inspiring individual who is doing some fantastic things. And it's really great to have people who are in educational leadership roles who have that type of values and drive to push sustainability projects, conservation projects, and inspire the teachers below them, and then support those teachers who themselves are inspiring. Great stuff. Now, of course, thank you all for listening to this episode of the podcast. I really need to do more to get these episodes out on a more regular basis. I apologize for the big gap in between, but you know what? Life in this part of China has been a bit bonkers lately due to COVID restrictions, lockdowns, online learning, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, you can, of course, follow me on Twitter at MadForMaple, Kevin O'Shea. You can follow me on Instagram at SheZenWildlife. And, of course, please come on over and join the Nature Talks podcast Facebook group. Join the Facebook group, join the conversation, share in the conversation about environmental education, sustainability, biodiversity, all of those really important things. So that's it for this episode. And remember, wherever you listen to this podcast, please give us a nice rating, give us a nice review, and please share this. If you're a teacher who's on Twitter, share these links around on Twitter. If you're on Facebook and some different education groups, please share us around, help us grow. It definitely motivates me to put out more episodes and to get out there and meet more inspiring educators that I can connect with you. All right, well, that does it. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you're happy, I hope you're healthy, and please stay safe.